The field looked empty, but it never felt that way to the men watching it. Snow covered the ground in uneven patches, and broken fence posts stuck out like rotten teeth, casting thin shadows as the light faded. A single figure stood near the fence, stiff and upright, its helmet catching just enough light to be seen from the tree line. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, silent and exposed. The German soldiers noticed it almost at once. They leaned forward, squinting through cold air, trying to decide if it was a man or a trick of the eye. Someone laughed under his breath and said it looked like a scarecrow. Another said no American would be stupid enough to stand still out there. But they kept watching, because something about it felt wrong. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The figure didn't crouch. It didn't fall. It didn't wave or run. It simply remained, like it was daring them to react. Finally, one soldier raised his rifle and fired a single shot. The crack echoed across the field, sharp and loud in the quiet. Dirt kicked up near the figure's feet. The helmet stayed upright. No return fire came. No movement followed. The man lowered his rifle, smiling now, convinced he'd just scared some foolish enemy into freezing in place. Another shot rang out. Then another. Soon, a machine gun joined in, short bursts sent toward the motionless shape. Because if it was a man, he had to be dead by now. The air filled with smoke and noise, and brass shells piled up in the snow as the gun chattered. When the firing stopped, the field went silent again, and the figure still stood. What the Germans didn't see were the eyes watching them from cover, calm and patient, counting every round fired. The men behind the trap had been there for hours, pressed low into shallow positions scraped into frozen earth. They barely moved, barely breathed, because they knew the entire plan depended on patience. The straw man wasn't meant to fall. It wasn't meant to scare anyone off. It was meant to pull bullets out of enemy guns until nerves took over. The idea came from hard experience, not clever theory. These men had learned that Germans shot fast and often, especially when they thought they'd spotted someone careless. Fire solved problems, and hesitation could mean death. So they built something that invited fire, something just real enough to pull the trigger. They made the figure from whatever they had. Straw from a nearby barn, a coat taken from a fallen soldier, wire twisted tight to hold shoulders and arms in place, a helmet cracked but still usable. From a distance, in bad light, it looked like a man who didn't know he was exposed. The Germans watched again, uneasy now. Someone said the American must be wounded. Someone else said he was playing dead. That was enough. The machine gun opened up once more, longer this time, because no one wanted to risk being the one who held back. Rounds tore through cloth and straw. The coat jerked and flapped as bullets punched holes straight through it. The helmet rang once and tipped, then settled back at an angle. Still, nothing fired back. Behind the lines, the Americans counted quietly. 10 rounds, 20, 50, 100. Time stretched. The cold seeped deeper into fingers and feet, but no one moved. The straw man stood there, soaking up attention, drawing eyes and firing away from the real danger. Every burst made the Germans feel safer, more certain that they were winning something, even if they couldn't explain exactly what. After nearly an hour, firing slowed. The Germans talked among themselves, annoyed now, unsure why they were still focused on something that refused to die properly. But each time silence lasted too long, someone fired again, just to be sure. By the end of the third hour, more than 200 rounds had been wasted on straw, cloth, and wire. Barrels were hot, belts were lighter, and confidence had quietly turned into irritation. That was when the order came to move forward. The German squad leader decided it was time to clear the field and confirm the kill. He waved 2 men ahead, telling them to advance slowly, weapons ready, because even a dead enemy could surprise you. The men stepped out of the tree line, boots crunching softly on frozen ground, eyes fixed on the battered figure near the fence. They never saw the real Americans shift positions. The first shots came from the side, sharp and controlled, hitting one of the advancing soldiers before he understood what was happening. He fell hard, rifle slipping from his hands. The second man spun, trying to find the source, and went down just as fast. Shouts erupted. The machine gun swung wildly, firing into the wrong area, because the crew had spent hours aiming at the straw man and assumed the threat was still there. More rifle fire cut in from another angle. Clean shots that dropped men who were still trying to orient themselves. Panic spread faster than orders. Someone yelled about an ambush. Someone else screamed for the gun to keep firing. The field that had felt controlled and safe only minutes before suddenly became a trap. The straw man still stood, torn and lifeless, while real men fell around it. When the Germans pulled back, dragging wounded with them, the field went quiet once more. Smoke drifted low. Spent shells glittered in the snow. The scarecrow leaned slightly now, full of holes, but still upright, still mocking. Later that night, one of the German soldiers wrote about it in a letter home. He said they'd been fooled by something that looked stupid, something no trained soldier should have taken seriously. He said the worst part wasn't the ambush itself, but realizing how much time and fire they'd wasted fighting nothing at all. Across the front, stories like this began to spread. Soldiers talked about fake heads, coats on sticks, rifles tied to posts. Commanders warned their men not to fire too quickly, not to waste ammo on shapes that didn't move. But fear is louder than orders, and habits are hard to break under pressure. For the Americans using the traps, it was never about tricking the enemy for fun. It was about survival. Every bullet fired at straw was one less bullet aimed at flesh. Every minute the Germans focused on a fake target was a minute real soldiers could reposition, observe, or simply stay alive. As the night deepened, the men crept forward and pulled the straw man down, careful and quiet. In their hands, it felt light and fragile, nothing like the damage it had caused. They stripped off the ruined coat, recovered the helmet, and began planning where the next one would stand, because tomorrow the Germans would be watching again. By morning, the field looked different, even though nothing obvious had changed. Snow covered the footprints. Shell holes froze solid. The fence leaned the same way it always had. But the Germans approached with less confidence now, scanning every shape twice, arguing over what was real and what wasn't. That hesitation mattered. The Americans used it. Another straw figure appeared that afternoon, placed farther back, half hidden behind a fallen tree, just visible enough to catch the eye. This one leaned forward slightly, as if crouching. From a distance, it looked wounded, maybe trying to crawl. It was perfect. The Germans noticed it almost at once. They talked about it longer this time, pointing, debating, trying to remember the warning they'd been given. Don't waste ammo. Confirm movement. But the shape was wrong again. Too human to ignore, and fear doesn't wait for permission. A rifle cracked. Then another. When the figure didn't drop, the machine gun joined in. Short, angry bursts fired more out of frustration than confidence. The sound echoed across the line, and once again, bullets chewed through straw instead of men. Behind their positions, the Americans listened and counted. This pattern repeated itself over days, then weeks. Sometimes the traps worked for hours, sometimes only minutes. But even when the Germans held fire, that restraint slowed them down, forced them to wait, to second-guess every advance. In combat, that kind of doubt could be deadly. One American soldier later said the traps didn't win battles, but they saved lives, and that was more important. They let men move without being instantly pinned. They let scouts observe without drawing fire. They gave tired soldiers a small edge in a war that rarely offered mercy. German reports began mentioning wasted ammunition and false targets, noting how difficult it had become to tell real threats from tricks. Some units adapted, sending single men forward to test positions, which exposed them to real danger. Others ignored orders and fired anyway, unable to shake the instinct to shoot first. Either way, the straw men kept doing their job. One evening, after a particularly heavy exchange, a German patrol moved cautiously into a position they believed was abandoned. They found 3 straw figures lined up near a ditch, all riddled with holes, all wearing mismatched coats and helmets. One soldier kicked one over and laughed, but the sound was hollow. No one else joined him. They burned the figures where they stood, angry and embarrassed, as if destroying them might erase the feeling of being fooled. But the next morning, another shape appeared somewhere else, watching, waiting. The trick spread quietly through Allied lines. Different units built their own versions, each slightly different, each tuned to local ground and enemy habits. Some added packs. Some added rifles angled just enough to catch light. A few even added wire so the head would slump when hit, making the illusion stronger. It was simple thinking in a complicated war. For the German soldiers facing it, the psychological weight grew heavier than the physical cost. Every quiet field felt dangerous. Every shadow became a possible threat. And when real attacks came, they came faster and cleaner, because defenders had already burned through patience and ammo on things that never lived. Near the end of the campaign, an American officer wrote in his notes that the strawman traps worked best not because they fooled trained soldiers, but because they exploited routine. Men saw what they expected to see. They reacted how they always had. The trap didn't create fear. It redirected it. When the front finally moved and the fighting shifted elsewhere, the fields were left behind, scattered with spent shells and torn cloth. The straw men disappeared, pulled apart or left to rot, their purpose finished. No monuments marked where they stood. No official reports praised them. But the men who built them remembered. Years after the war, veterans spoke about the trick with quiet pride. Not because it was clever, but because it reminded them that survival often came down to small choices made under pressure. A coat instead of a body. Straw instead of flesh. Waiting instead of rushing. The Germans had mocked the idea at first, laughed at the thought of fighting a scarecrow. Then they spent hours shooting at one, burning through hundreds of rounds, giving away position, time, and control. In war, those losses mattered. In the end, the straw man trap proved something simple and unsettling. You didn't always need more firepower to win an advantage. Sometimes you just needed to understand how the enemy thought, and give them exactly what they expected to see. Thanks for watching WW2 Vault. If you want more true combat stories like this, where simple ideas changed lives on the battlefield, make sure you're subscribed, because we'll be back with another story you won't forget.